Right, hello everybody. It's 1400 for 2 p.m. on the dot, and we'll get started right on time. Welcome to today's webinar. It's the second webinar of the Share North Squared project, and today we'll be focusing on, shifting our focus from parking requirements for new builds to mobility needs in real estate developments. As you can tell, maybe this is a meeting setup instead of webinar software that we're using today. So we'll start with a few housekeeping or share a few housekeeping items. But it's lovely to see so many of you on this Tuesday afternoon. I hope you're all doing well. I'd also like to welcome our two speakers today. So welcome to all of you and our two speakers who you're listening to today. First, we'll have Esther De Reys from Autodelen.net, who will give us some regional or broader input to why parking requirements in new real estate developments? Why is there a need to shift to mobility needs? And she'll share some nice examples from Flanders for us. And then after that, we'll zoom in to my colleague, Cornelia Cordes from the City of Bremen, and we'll share Bremen's policy approach for how focus can be shifted from parking requirements to mobility needs. Also on today's call is Steffi De Moor from Impact, our communication partner in the project. She's behind the scenes helping us with the technicalities of today's call, and we'll be fielding your questions and so on and so forth. And my name finally is Rebecca Karbaumer. I'll be your moderator for today. I also work for the City of Bremen in the Unit for Strategic Transport Planning. Before we get started, obviously the obligatory introducing the project that's bringing you the webinar today. Share North Squared project is an Interreg North Sea Region project with 15 partners and made up of cities, real estate developers or social housing developers, NGOs, and research institutions. And what do we want? Obviously, we want more sustainability and resource and spatial efficiency in real estate developments, more affordable housing, and more shared mobility to support multimodal travel behavior. We also want less in the project, meaning less car ownership, less dependency, and less demand for parking. Couple housekeeping rules before we get started. Your microphones are automatically muted so that we don't have any sound disruptions, but you are welcome to ask questions later on after the presentations. Simply raise your hand and we will unmute you and you can ask them using your voice. You also have a voice in written form. You're welcome to use the chat to ask your questions during and after the presentations. Also request you please keep your cameras off if you are not presenting or not asking a question. That saves bandwidth and hopefully distractions for other speakers. And also, most importantly, enjoy today's webinar. Frequently asked question around webinars is usually, will the slides be shared afterward? Yes, they will on the Share North Squared project website. And also notification to all of you, we are recording today's webinar and we'll upload the recording on the website as well. So if you would prefer not to appear by name or an image, you can change your name in the Zoom tool in the navigation bar at the bottom. There should be 3 dots and you are able to change your name so that you can remain anonymous. This introductory part obviously won't be part of the recording, so you'll have time for that. Right. And then finally, we have some poll questions because before we get started, we want to know more about you as well. And so we'd like to know what kind of organization you're representing. Steffi, could you launch the first poll, please? So let us know what your professional background is today. What's your interest? Are you a public authority, politician, or decision maker? Do you represent a developer or the real estate sector? Are you a mobility service provider or other? Sorry, we only had 5 answer options. So other also includes maybe an NGO, maybe a research institution, maybe a consultant. Feel free to share. I'll just give you a few more seconds. Great, thanks very much. And we'll share those results for you so that you, as well as our speakers, know that the majority represent the other sector, almost 60%. And we do have some mobility service providers and some public authorities joining us today. And then second poll question. Steffi, could you launch that one as well, please? We're interested in knowing if you are involved in the housing development policies in your area. Yes, no, a little bit. Maybe for those public authorities, that's a yes, hopefully. And for the mobility providers, a maybe. Maybe you're on the provider side, providing mobility solutions for new real estate developments. And a little bit. And thanks very much for your responses. We'll share those with you. And it is a mixed bag of yeses, nos, and a little bit. And then last but not least, let's practice the chat function before we get started. Write into your chat, into the chat, please, which country you're joining us from. Hopefully we'll be able to see. Oh, wow, very far. So Norway, Sweden, Belgium, Egypt, France. Lots of Norwegian participants, several from Sweden. Thanks for joining us from all the way from Egypt. The Netherlands, lots of Swedish participants today. Wonderful. Great, thanks very much. Excellent. Well, now to actually what you're here for. Without any further ado, I'd like to give the word to Esther. I'll stop sharing my screen so that you can start yours as well. And the floor is yours.
I'll try sharing my screen like this. And now hopefully you can see it full screen.
Yes, now we see it full screen.
Great. Thank you, Rebecca, for giving such a great introduction in this webinar. And as you all know, because you all registered for this webinar, today's topic is about shifting focus from parking requirements to mobility needs. And as Rebecca already said, I will give you some insights in why that is necessary or why that's relevant. And I will also give you some examples from Belgium examples of municipalities that have been shifting their focus from these parking requirements to regulations that focus more on mobility needs. My name is Esther. I work at Autodelen.net. We are a Belgian NGO that works on that promotes car sharing in Flanders and in Belgium. And today I'm here to give you our insights on this topic. But to start with, I would like to invite you to shift your focus from here or the country you're from to the city of Antwerp, second largest city in Belgium. And the first example I have brought. So in Antwerp, of course, a parking bylaw is into place, or developers that want to develop or place living units, housing entities in the city of Antwerp, they have to abide by some rules. They have to abide by the parking requirements that the city has set. And this is the parking bylaw that Antwerp has set last year. It's a new bylaw. I won't go into detail in it, but because it has a lot of different regulations, it differs from a geographical point of view, but also it differs on typology. So where you're placing your project development and what type of project development you want to place, that really has an impact on how many parking spots you need to build. But to give you a concrete example of that, if you were a project developer that wants to build 100 housing units, then in some cases in Antwerp, you would need to build 170 parking spots. That is quite a lot. It can be less, of course, depending on the location of the project, but in some cases, this amount of parking spots is required for you to build. And that means you need to build a lot of parking. And that also means that a lot of space in Antwerp is allocated to parking spots. a lot of space that isn't used efficiently, because we see that 1 in 5 parking spots in Antwerp isn't sold, is empty. And it's really funny because, as you see in the top right corner of my slide, that's a Dutch saying. It just says, and the rest of the space is parking, which is a bit of a joke because a lot of people from Antwerp say that Antwerp is the city and the rest of Belgium is parking. But in effect, or exactly, we can see that a lot of space in Antwerp as well is parking space, and it isn't really an efficient space, rather, because a lot of these spots are empty. It's a bit sad that there are so many parking spots, because as we can see, some residents in the city, some people from Antwerp or from other cities in Belgium, they require another allocation to space. So some people would prefer green areas in their neighborhood, would need more playgrounds for their children, or some nice areas to walk or to cycle around. Other people as well. So another point of view from residents could be that they don't use car parking spots because they don't have a car, because they ride their bicycles more and they would prefer bicycle parkings. So these regulations, the regulation for Antwerp, for example, isn't well adapted to all the needs of all the residents. Building fewer parking spots, therefore, could create a better scenario for a lot of different stakeholders. We call that a win-win scenario. And the win-win scenario is the case because we see that a lot of stakeholders can benefit from building fewer parking spots. First and foremost, the project developer, of course, because if they need to build less parking spots, then they can reduce building costs, they need to buy less material, and they can allocate the space that is needed to build parking spots, rather. They can use that space for something else, which means that a lot of their project developments can become more sustainable. Space that isn't allocated to parking can be allocated to green areas, to more housing entities, etc. So in this way, that's a unique selling point for a project developer to create more livable areas, to create more sustainable buildings, and to sell more apartments in the end. But it's also a win, of course, for the local government, because you can attract more residents if you create nice cities where people can enjoy living, where they can have a lot of green areas, where they can walk around, cycle around while being safe. So the less parking spots you have, the less cars you have, which means more livable areas, and that will attract more residents. And it can also induce a modal shift, as we all know that building a lot of parking spots attracts more cars, attracts more people that use a car. If you build less parking spots, or if your parking requirement is lower, then of course you will attract people using other types of modes, other types of transport modes, and and thus you can induce a modal shift. And the second win is for the residents. They are sometimes forgotten. A lot of local governments and project developers in Belgium might still think that residents need car parking, that they want car parking. But as we can see, as we saw in the previous slides, a lot of residents also ask for different things, for more livable areas, for an agreeable environment where they can live. And they also ask for affordable housing. If people need to buy a parking spot next to their house, then the cost of housing also increases a lot. So if less parking spots are built, less parking spots need to be sold, and thus it can create for residents a more affordable way of living somewhere, a more affordable way of housing. So the lowering of parking requirements really is a win-win-win scenario. And that's also the reason why in the Antwerp Parking Bylaw, or in the requirements Antwerp has set, a deviation from the parking requirement is possible. They say that if a project developer really motivates it well enough, they can drop the parking requirement, or they can lower the parking requirements, thus needing to build less parking spots than is regulated in the Parking Bylaw. The Antwerp bylaw in here is quite vague or open, so any motivation is good enough. You just need to motivate it well enough. But we see in other examples in Belgium or in Flanders that most of the times parking requirements are lowered because shared mobility can be implemented. Why shared mobility? Well, it's quite obvious because a shared car can replace multiple private cars. The ratio opinions are not really or differ on that, whether the replacement ratio is high or low. Some people say one shared car can replace 5 cars. It can be up to 16. It can be lower than 5. I'll leave it in the middle here. I think that's a topic for another webinar. But in either way, shared mobility really can replace multiple privately owned cars. And that's why a lot of municipalities in Belgium or in Flanders are focusing on that in their parking requirements or in their parking bylaws. And I will give you 4 examples of it in Belgium. I won't go into detail because I don't have the time for that. But you can always ask me afterwards if you want to learn more about them. But I will just give you an overview on the way municipalities are tackling this and how they differ between different municipalities. So the first example I brought is an example from Turnhout. They have a regulation that says that shared mobility can lower the parking requirement. The project developer there needs to decide what type of shared mobility he needs to or he wants to implement, and if he wants to have an open system or a closed shared mobility system. An open system means that the neighborhood of the project development can also use and benefit from the shared mobility system. The closed system means that only residents can use the car sharing or the bike sharing systems that are implemented. And depending on whether they choose an open system or a closed system, a different budget is allocated to the integration of shared mobility, and more or fewer parking spots can be replaced. The details of that you can ask me afterwards, but I will leave it at that. So this is one type of or one way to lower the parking requirement through the means of shared mobility. Another example is from the municipality of Weinigem, which is a bit more specific. So they put into place a specific replacement ratio. Every shared car here can deduce 5 private parking spots. So the parking requirements can be lowered by 5 if one shared car is implemented. And here the project developer needs to provide for a budget, but the budget goes over to the local government, and the local government then stays in control and decides which type of shared mobility will be implemented, which is different from Turnhout, where the project developer chooses the type of shared mobility and chooses the provider of shared mobility that will be implemented in the project. A third example is also very different from the first 2 because it's as the case in Antwerp, it's a bit more open. There, every project developer can apply for a permit to build a housing development, and they can do a research into the feasibility of shared mobility for this project. And if the mobility study or the research points out that shared mobility can be feasible and is relevant, then a deviation from the parking requirement is allowed. So only if shared mobility is interesting in a specific project and that also differs from one project to the next, then the parking requirements can be lowered. So they look into each project one at a time, and there is no overall regulation that states specifications on the integration of shared mobility. Which also differs again from the very last example, the example of Rotselaar, where the specifications on implementing shared mobility are really specific. So you also have a replacement ratio. Every shared car can replace 5 parking spots, and there is a maximum on this. So at maximum 3 shared cars can be implemented. So at the most 15 parking spots can be deduced from the overall parking requirement. The municipality here also states some kind of requirements for communication and on the visibility of shared mobility. So project developer really needs to make sure that the shared car is visible above ground and that there is a communication strategy. And the project developer here also needs to carry out everything in regards to the integration of shared mobility. So I have these four different types of regulating the implementation of shared mobility and thus lowering parking norms for a specific project development. There have been a lot of experiments, as you can see, a lot of different ways to adapt parking bylaws or parking regulations and thus lowering these requirements. But there still are some thresholds or some pitfalls, some questions local municipalities have on how we can integrate shared mobility and how we can lower these parking requirements. And these thresholds are the following three. So the first question a lot of municipalities have is the question of the replacement ratio. We have seen in Rotselaar and in Weinigem that they put in place a replacement ratio that is 1 to 5, but other replacement ratios are equally valid depending on the location, depending on the project. So there's really, there have been really a lot of questions on which replacement ratio should be put into place into which context. And that is something we don't have an answer to yet, but we're working on that. A second pitfall is keeping the balance between a bylaw on the one hand that is flexible. So as they did in Yale and as they do in Antwerp, the municipality and the project developer look from one project to the next, what is feasible, what is relevant in regards to shared mobility. And that is good because then you can make something, or you can integrate shared mobility that is interesting for the context and for the project itself. But on the other hand, a bylaw still needs to be a law. So a lot of municipalities are also looking for specifications that they can apply to that they can apply for every project. And that's a bit a tricky balance to keep at this moment, which is why we see a lot of different requirements or different regulations in regards to this implementation of shared mobility. And then the third pitfall is that we see a lot of focus on car sharing. All of the requirements I have shown, or all of the regulations I have shown in the previous slide, are focused on the implementation of car sharing, while in some projects it might be interesting to focus on other forms of shared mobility, such as cargo bike sharing, but also on other forms of sustainable mobility as a whole. Maybe making sure that people can use public transport or other types of sustainable mobility might be interesting, but these are not integrated in the regulations we have at this moment to make sure that the parking requirements are lowered. So these three things are still something we need to figure out, but at the same time, we see that a lot of municipalities in Belgium are interested in working on lowering parking requirements and building more living environments that are focused on mobility needs rather than on car parking, which is quite interesting and which will be developed normally further in the next couple of years in more municipalities in Belgium. And here I see Rebecca coming up again, which is perfect because I was at my last slide, which is the slide that invites you to ask me any questions you like if you have at this moment.
Thank you, Esther. An insightful and perfectly timed presentation. As always, don't expect any different from you. So there has been some chatter in the chat. But first of all, I'd like to say thanks for your presentation. And the following presentation, I think, docks onto that really quickly because the City of Bremen has addressed those pitfalls that you claimed in its mobility bylaw. And my colleague Cornelia will present that in a few minutes. But some questions or some of the chatter in the chat is leads me to ask you the question, Esther. you said, yes, the focus is very much on car sharing. That's what the chatter was also about. But what role do local governments play in making car sharing successful, in your opinion?
That's a very good question, because I believe they play the most important role. Local governments, they have an overview on the type of mobility that needs to be that needs to be applied in their region. They have an overview on the mobility needs for sure, but also on spatial development, so they can really make the links between this is the region where we're going to build, and so this is also a region where these types of mobility can be relevant. So the overview or the planning, the strategic planning, that's really in the hands of the local government, which is really important, especially when we're talking about shared mobility. And you can see that as well in Belgium, that a lot of times municipalities push this integration of shared mobility into the hands of the project developers, while they are forgetting that they need this strategic planning, that they have this strategic planning overview. And so you get these kind of situations where project developers integrate shared mobility in one place. That is totally not interesting in regards to the context, because, for example, a project developer can place 10 shared cars in a specific project development, but at the same time, in the surroundings of that project are already 3 or 4 shared cars that are used. So the need for more shared cars in that project is not really relevant, while in another project on the other side of the city, there might be. And I think this is the way the strategic planning here is really important, that the local government steers a project developer a bit into integrating shared mobility that really fits the needs of the whole region, not just this one project. So that's one thing. And then the other thing I think is communication wise. I think it's important that a project developer does it as well. If they implement shared mobility, that they think about how to communicate to their residents, but a local government as well communicates to their citizens on a whole, on a wider scale. So they really need to take a new shared mobility offer that is implemented in a specific housing project into their communication strategy on shared mobility as a whole. So I think these two things are the most important to adhere to for a local government.
Yeah, thanks very much. That's also the specific context and the general context. Local governments play an important role for making car sharing successful and making car sharing friendly policies, using it in themselves to generate use. So thanks. There was also a question about green space. You presented the view of like that residents often said, I'd prefer to have more green space than a car parking lot. Why or what's the benefit of green space to developers and cities, and is there a benefit?
Good question. That's also a good question for a project developer, I would say, to answer. But there really is a benefit. I think for us as a mobility organization, maybe I don't need to go into that much detail because I'm not an expert on green space, of course, but we see that green space really helps people to go to other forms of sustainable transport. If you like walking around somewhere, if you like cycling around somewhere, you will do it more. So this green space is really important to induce the modal shift, but as well, it has so many social benefits. People won't come together in a gray concrete parking lot, but they will come together in areas that are greener and that are nicer to be in. So I think there are a lot of people here present that can give many more arguments on the benefits of green space, but we can see it a lot in communication with just people around the street and users of shared mobility, car shares, that people just like being around in nice and livable areas.
Yeah, and green space, I mean, there are many benefits for public health, but also the urban environment, reducing urban heat island effect, rainwater
Exactly.
catchment through heavy rain events. So ecosystem services are quite important. And the actual questions, are these green spaces used a lot? We don't know, but in general, a public green space at least is more accessible to anybody than a parking space for a private car.
Exactly.
Essentially. There's some other, I think, questions coming up. Maybe we'll have time for the discussion afterward, because I have some more for you as well, and might also invite some participants to unmute their microphone and share their insights afterward. But first, let's switch to Cornelia Cordes and her presentation from Bremen, a policy perspective from Bremen, and how to shift focus from parking requirements to mobility. Floor is yours, Connie. And we can't hear you yet, unfortunately. No. Nope. Also not. Which is always, we tested the sound before we got started, promise, and it doesn't work for some reason. Nope, can't hear you. Maybe it's maybe select your different microphone. Nope. And sorry, folks, we did like 5 minutes before we started the webinar, everything was working just fine. Steffi, is there anything that you can do from your side?
I'm trying, but I don't think it's a Zoom problem.
All right, plan B. We'll take my colleague Connie will come to my spot. She's just in the office next door. I will open her presentation, and then we'll take a 5-minute break. Apologize, and we'll be right back. Grab yourself a cup of coffee. Feel free to chat and answer or ask yourself each additional questions. Well, Esther, I've got a question for you. Still, while you're still here and we're pulling up Connie's presentation, you mentioned visibility and communication is one of the building blocks in one of the Flemish cities. How important is that, or why is visibility and communication so important for successful shared mobility services and car sharing in particular?
Yeah, it is important because, as probably everyone here knows, car sharing and shared mobility is something that is still fairly new in comparison to using a privately owned car. So many people just don't know what car sharing is, what shared mobility is, how it works, that it even exists. And if you don't know something, you won't use it. You won't know how to use it, or you won't see the benefits from it. So we see that a lot, which is why I thought it was interesting that only one of the examples I have shown has communication requirements in it. That really specifically says the shared car should be visible, because if people walk past it, then they see it. And we are talking with shared mobility, we're talking about behavioral change as well. And there is research on that. People need to see something up until 20 times to make sure that they adapt or they change their behavior. So seeing a shared car 20 times, that might induce you or might give you the opportunity to maybe think about car sharing. If you don't see it 20 times, then that won't happen. So that visibility is super important, which is why I think it's interesting that only one of the examples in the parking bylaws has that requirement. The others, they just say there needs to be a shared car and then we'll see. But I think it's really important that as a local government, you also make these requirements of communication, knowing how to reach end users to make sure that they make the change to shared mobility. Because if you don't, people won't do it just by themselves. They need to be intrinsically motivated to make the step. If they're not super highly motivated, then you need to push them somewhat towards making the change, and that only helps if it's visible and if people see it a lot.
Thanks very much. We also have the experience that in Bremen, not only communication is essential, but shared mobility lives from visibility. If you can't see an offer, if it's in the back lot or the lowest level of the parking garage, it just doesn't exist to the vast majority of citizens. So thanks very much. So Connie is back, now labeled as Steffi Dumour. But maybe the sound works again. Can you activate your microphone, please?
Yeah. So can you hear me now?
Now we can hear you, yes.
Okay, because once you activate, once you share your screen, everything changes. And so now I could activate my microphone. Sorry for that inconvenience. We tested everything and everything worked fine at the beginning. But now with a little delay, I can actually start, which is really nice. A big moin from the City of Bremen. This is how we say hello when we're in northern Germany. And I am today presenting a policy perspective from the City of Bremen, because we have something that a lot of cities envy us for, and that is a very innovative parking bylaw. And thank you also, Esther, for that good preparation for my presentation, because you explained the prerequisites that are very important to understand what I will be talking about today. So, but first of all, in order to understand our new parking bylaw, we will jump back in time a bit and talk about our first parking bylaw, which was in place from 2013 until 2022. Even back then, this parking bylaw was in itself very innovative, as it entailed voluntary mobility management measures, which enabled the developer to build up to 80% less parking spaces, even back then. These management measures should and would lessen the dependency to car usage and ownership, as we will see later. Unsurprisingly, as these measures were voluntary, not all development sites were built with them. But, however, there were some developers who saw the potential not only for the lowering building costs, but also to provide their tenants new forms of shared mobility that would suit their needs and hence influence their behavior in mobility, and also help them to do the modal shift to more sustainable modes of mobility. So since there were some development sites that implemented these mobility management measures, we as a city asked ourselves, well, does that have an impact? And we therefore did an evaluation of these management measures within the parking bylaw that was in place back then. We had 18 properties starting from the north, the Lesum Park in Bremen North, more down south to Neustadt Huckelriede. And we asked in these 18 properties the users of the concept, and as a control group, also the neighbors. Both had similar socio-economic characteristics so that they were comparable to each other. And what did we find out? Let's look into that now. there was a huge impact on car ownership. In the properties with the concepts, the percentage of car-free households was twice as high as in those without a mobility concept. That was very significant. And we could also see that the households with the users of those concepts had 10% less one car per household. So that was also very interesting to see. We also asked questions about the impact on the behavior, on the modal shift or modal split, first of all, but then on the modal shift in the end, because we could also see that 11% less people would use the car as a driver or a passenger. 7% more people would use public transport as well as bicycles, which was very significant and a positive impact on sustainable mobility behavior. And then also very important is as well the acceptance among those users. So we asked, what do you think of these management measures being offered in your housing development instead of parking spaces? And we found out 54% said it was good, up to very good. However, though, 60% of the inhabitants of these buildings did not even know about the mobility management measures that were available to them. So 2 questions arose from that. First of all, how could these numbers could have looked like if everyone would have known about those measures? And secondly, how do we present that? How do we prevent that in the future from happening? So, well, revisiting the Mobilitätsbauortsgesetz, which was passed in September 2022, so now almost 2 years back, through a participatory process that started 2 years earlier and also took into consideration the evaluation survey that I just presented. There were some changes in how the parking bylaw looked like in the end. So what exactly was changed? What is so innovative about it? Let's have a look. Innovative is that it is mandatory now to do mobility management. So this is the first thing that you have to do when you want to build a development in Bremen. You have to do mobility management, either integrate car sharing, provide car sharing memberships, provide public transport memberships, and much more. And then that is very important, and that we have heard about that as well earlier. We have to provide a communication concept. So this is part of the building application that is being handed in by the developer. Secondly, of course, car parking spaces and bike parking spaces, which have to be really good, are also being able to be built. And thirdly, the developer, if they do not want to build those car parking spaces, can still pay a fee to the city, but that's very important. Now, this fee does not vanish somewhere in the midst of the city budget. The fee goes into a specific account and is then being used for management measures that are being implemented in the city of Bremen and for the districts that these houses are being built. So the proportion of the mobility requirements that must be met by mobility management measures depend on the location of the building in the urban area. So we have, first of all, the zone number 1 here in the middle. I hope you can see my cursor here. Here, if you want to build a development site there, it's basically car-free, but 75% of the parking and mobility requirements have to be met by mandatory mobility management. Then secondly, in zone number 2, which are the adjacent zones to the inner city center, 50% of the requirements have to be met by those management measures, and in the rest of the city, it's 25%. So what exactly are those mobility management measures? We have 3 categories. that we divided those into. So we not only want car sharing, of course, car sharing is a very good measurement, it's a very good measure to lower the demand for parking, and also, well, that can replace private cars. But we can also, well, the developer can also provide car sharing memberships. They can provide public transport memberships and high quality bike parking. This is the category 1 that has to be entered into the building application. Category number 2 and 3 include bike sharing, cargo bikes, bike repair shops, package stations, shared e-scooters, railway passes, and much more. These can be supplementary to the category 1 and be integrated into that building application. And last but not least, and not to be forgotten and very important, the communication concept. So all of these measures have to be communicated from the beginning and throughout the whole usage of the building, because people have to know that they're there. If they don't know, they cannot use it. Very importantly as well, all measures must be target group appropriate. They have to have a duration of at least 5 years, because in order to change your mobility behavior, that will take some time. So we set 5 years, and in the end have to reduce the demand for parking. But it could also it also depends on the amount of the budget that you have. But we will see to that later. You will understand how that works. And we'll do that right now, because now we're going to go into the perspective of a developer in order to explain how this process will look like. This is a sample calculation. Well, I'm a developer. I want to build a new build in zone number 2. You remember zone number 2 with 50%, so the adjacent zone to the inner city center. I want to build a house with 20 flats, each with 65 square meters. We now calculate the mathematical parking requirement is 12 car parking spaces and 44 bicycle parking spaces. So now how do we get from here to a mobility budget? That's very simple. We take zone number 2, 50%, 6 of those 12 car parking spaces, they must be fulfilled with mobility management measures. And this goes about like this. 6 times 12,600 times 90% equals 68,000 euros. What exactly does that mean? Well, we have 6 car parking spaces. We have an equivalent amount that is being put into place. It's a theoretical amount that has been calculated down from the average building costs of car parking spaces. And according to the zones, there are different amounts that are being used. But here in this zone number 2, and for this development site, it's 12,600 euros per car parking spot. And then we multiply that by 90%. So the developer gets a 10% discount on the amount of money that he has now to bundle up into a mobility budget. What happens to the rest? The remaining parking requirements are 6 cars and 44 bicycles. Well, the 44 bicycle parking spots, they have to be built nonetheless. There is no way out of that, because it's very important to actually have bicycle parking, because if you don't use your car that much, you have to be able to store your bicycle that you use instead in an appropriate and safe way. Well, you can, for the car parking, you can either build those parking spaces, that's up to you. You could also pay a fee to the city, which then goes into the aforementioned fund that we then use for the citywide mobility management measures. Or you could also double up your mobility budget and have around 130,000 euros that you can then use in order to make your development more attractive, and in order to give that to the tenants of the house. How does that look in action? So here we have the sample calculation when it comes to the mobility management measures. So we have 68,000 euros. Our target group here are singles, young couples, young families, and the mobility budget is set for 10 years. So we have car sharing memberships with approximately 10,000 euros for that whole period. Public transport tickets with approximately 16,000 euros for this whole period of 10 years. We have a shared cargo bike with approximately 20,000 for a cargo bike, the box that the cargo bike is then being stored in, because you actually have to keep that safe. And of course, more and better bike parking spaces, also for trailers, because you have young couples and families that have a lot of more stuff than just the regular bicycle that you ride with to work. And then of course that leaves a lot also for good communication. So the communication concept is very, very important. We cannot cease to put the focus on that. They can they can announce these mobility measures with an ad when they advertise for the apartments. They can give out info packages upon moving in, and then also the annual reminder for at Christmas time, or even other holidays that are being celebrated. And then we still have the district-oriented use of compensation fees by the city management measures. So all the money that goes into the fund that I talked about earlier on will be used by the city for the following management measures. So for the construction of mobility hubs or small hubs, for the retrofitting of these hubs and the electrification of those, for the expansion and supplementation of additional cargo bike sharing stations, and e-scooter parking areas, and the expansion of public bicycle parking facilities. It can also be used as a neighborhood-specific communication measures, like, for example, Mobility Day, where you come and then present cargo bikes, and everybody can try to ride on a cargo bike, because not everybody has done that yet. Yes, and then of course what we're also doing in Bremen, and that is a very innovative approach as well. We are offering training seminars for architects and planners, because we cannot erwarten, no, I missed that word, it doesn't matter. We're like, we cannot say that the architects and planners are already specialists in mobility management, because they already have to do a lot of things, but most of them are not experts in that. So we're offering a free training program in cooperation with the Chamber of Architects here in Bremen. And in Germany, every architect has to take part in seminars each year and has to gain points, so 16 points. And surprisingly, our training program will offer, if you take part in all 4 modules, 16 points. So if you have completed all of these, you're set for the year. And what does it entail? We have, first of all, the mobility management, why and how. This is on the basis of our parking bylaw. Then we have a module on car sharing and other sharing modes, how to integrate that into housing developments or developments, real estate developments as such. We have a module on cargo bike parking and bike parking, the do's and the don'ts. So should a developer integrate the cargo bike parking in the lower basement, or maybe shouldn't he? So we also have excursions here, so people actually get to know how hard it is to open the door while you're holding on to a cargo bike. And then we have the last module, which we have not held yet, that is about communication. So 3 of those we already did, and 1 we will do in October. Yeah, so I am already at the end of my presentation, and I say thank you for listening, for your attention, and I am happy to answer your questions.
Thank you, Connie. Thanks very much. Looking for some specific questions on Cornelia's presentation about the parking or mobility requirements in Bremen. And yeah, Anne-Séverine has a question about how do we measure the reduction or car parking demand after 5 years? It's a tricky one.
It's a tricky one. It actually is. The reduction after 5 years in the development as such. That's.
I think it refers to where we have minimum 5 years required for the mobility concept.
Well,
and then how does it continue afterward?
Yeah, afterwards. Well, we are just 2 years into the new parking bylaw, so there has not yet been an evaluation, and we are working on how to do that. Actually, this afternoon we are having our first meeting with a lot of colleagues here from the House, and we're going to talk about how it went up until now and how we're going to continue. So we have not yet evaluated anything, because nothing that has been applied for through this parking bylaw has yet been built, because that's a very long process. So at the moment, we don't have an answer to that yet, but ask us in 5 years again.
If it's okay, Cornelia, if I can add to that, the 5-year minimum for the mobility concept comes from, is a challenging one, and it's specifically targeted at smaller real estate projects with small budgets, where we expect in at least 5 years to change mobility behavior. The length of a mobility concept, depending on the available budget, can be 20, 30, 40 years. But indeed, it is a challenging question. It's one that we're often posed. What happens after the 5-year minimum is up, and indeed that's a tricky part, but we chose specifically in Bremen not to call for a parking requirement that is or mobility requirement that is indefinite, so for as long as the building exists, because we would put smaller developers with a small budget at a disadvantage. And also because we anticipate mobility behavior changing after that time. But as Cornelia said, evaluations will be coming up. But we do agree that's one of the pitfalls is that with a smaller budget, you don't have mobility concepts that are available for an unlimited amount of time. There was another question also about communication. How do we ensure that communication is done in housing developments? How do we follow up on that, and how do we monitor on that? Because even as a requirement, is it challenging to follow up on? Question for you, Connie.
Yes. So as far as I know, because I'm not actually working on that specifically, but as far as I know, there will be we have these communication concepts, and we will ask the developers to tell us what they have been doing when these buildings have been developed. But so far, also we have not yet started with the evaluation on that and with the follow-up. But if you want to add to that, Rebecca, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
No, that's fine. And one final question for you, because we're also running out of time, unfortunately, is that is there a dialogue between the developers and the municipality, and how have they reacted to the new mobility bylaw since its implementation?
Well, there is a dialogue. We have a 2-weekly how do you call that, like meeting, an open meeting online, where our colleagues who are working with the bylaw, who are actually taking a look at the building applications, and then they're talking to the developers. And every developer is also being called back, like by my colleague who's working on that. So there are always dialogues about the building applications and about their measurements that they're actually doing. And how did they react to the new law? Maybe Rebecca, you can say more to that, because I've not been here that long.
It's a mixed bag of reactions. There are developers that are really excited about the flexibility that this new law provides, and that it's now possible to build low car or no car developments. There's some that are really innovative, very motivated in being part of the mobility transition away from private car ownership. And then all the way in the other end of the spectrum, developers who are frustrated by the law, by the additional bureaucracy, by the need to deal with mobility measures, and because they say, I need at least 1 car parking space per flat in order to be able to sell it. So we get the full range, and that's from architects, or also mainly big developers. But we found that the training seminars that we're offering at the Chamber of Architects have been really successful in providing arguments and tools for the developer or the architect specifically in presenting the economic benefits to developers of reducing car parking for the benefit of other mobility measures. So unfortunately, we're out of time for questions. There's just one last thing I would like to share with you and the participants, and that is what is next. What's next is another webinar from the project, specifically about the role of shared mobility in affordable housing. Can shared mobility contribute to more affordable housing? And our partner Housing Europe, that's basically the overarching European NGO of social housing developers. They will be presenting in this webinar together with one of their partners from the Social Housing Development Company, and that will be on December 4th at 11 o'clock, and you will be able to register for that on the Share North Squared website, as well as LinkedIn invitations shortly after this webinar is over. That's also where you will find the presentations from today's webinar. And then last but not least, if you are new to the field and to the world of shared mobility and would like to deepen your knowledge in that field, this is a publication from a previous project, The Planner's Guide to the Shared Mobility Galaxy, that really covers the broad range of shared mobility offers, from car sharing to shared micromobility, describes the different types, the type of impact, and really good practice examples also for making economically or creating economically viable shared mobility services. And that is available in 4 different languages on the Share North website under the guide. And we invite you to take a look at that and download that as well. So yeah, that leaves me to say thank you to our speaker, Esther and Connie. Technical support from Steffi, and thank you very much to the audience for sharing your afternoon with us for 1 hour, and for your understanding and patience for the small technical glitch. So a round of applause for all of you and for me as well, and hope to see you next time. Have a great day. Bye-bye.